Sure.
All right.
My name is Ben Fields, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Goldsmiths, University of London, working on transforming musicology. And my particular aspect of the project is concerned with social networks and social media, and how people sort of talk about music and around music and with music in social networks, so like music criticism and things like this, and then applying some fairly standard network analysis techniques, but applying them to music and music communities and things like this. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hello, Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Page. I'm a senior researcher at the University of Oxford E-Research Centre. I also work on the Transform Musicology project amongst several other projects, some of which are related to music and some of which have a more computer science background. So within the project, the work that I'm doing mostly is around applying technologies around what's called linked data and the semantic web. So that tends to apply across a number of different musicological studies within the project, because the whole idea of that technology is to try and bring the different results, methods together. So it's all about linking them. So that means we get the joy of working right across the project with the different investigations that are going on.
Awesome. Well, thank you as well for taking time out of your day, both of you, and all the way in another country. I really appreciate it. Let's get started and talk about your website. Tell me about what your goals are for that long term, why you started it, and who's involved with that project. Either one of you can start.
So the Transfer Musicology website is really the sort of the like public facing front end of the whole project, and so I think the goal there is to have a single place for all the output of the project to be seen, to be visible, to be gathered together, that can at least last for the sort of foreseeable future. Yeah, I mean, I guess that serves a few purposes, but principally among them is the sort of unified gathering of everything we've done for the project. So, which otherwise would be in a bunch of different places, I think. Yeah, so it's really it's generally a sort of public outreach effort and recording exercise, I think, as much as anything else.
So I don't know if it's worth me saying something about the project as well. So this was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK. So this is essentially a government-funded research body on the arts and humanities side. But what the aim of the project was really to do was to bring a number of digital methods, some of which had grown out of a community around what's called music information retrieval, and apply these to the musicology study in the humanities. So this is also could be seen as part of sort of a wider effort in academia that's generally referred to as digital humanities. So it's about digital methods within the humanities. So there are a number of partners in that with different specialisms, some from a music background, some from a mixed background, some from a technology background. And that includes Goldsmiths, University of London, which is where Ben is and where the project is run from. Also Queen Mary, which is part of the University of London, and which has a very strong background in some of the, I guess, more technical aspects of music information retrieval. The music faculty here at Oxford, which I'm not part of, but we have a DPhil student there and a professor in the musicology department working there, and the E-Research Centre here in Oxford, which is generally an interdisciplinary centre that aims to sort of bring new technologies to research in other disciplines.
Cool. Let me ask you a question, since we're talking about technology. How long do you think technology and musicology studies have been sort of intermixed? Because I talk to more and more professors and their background is in computer science. So
that's a really interesting question, and in some ways is the point of the project. It's rather perhaps grandly titled Transforming Musicology, but obviously what it's really looking to do is bring some of these digital methods in. And I guess one of the questions is how far are those applicable to what might be considered more traditional musicology, particularly when you have this balance between what could be seen as close reading of materials, where there are a limited number of materials read comprehensively by individuals, versus perhaps the more distant computational techniques that we might be applying, where clearly you don't get the same level of detail, but you do get to apply it over a much larger scale of information. And I think the answer, as you might expect, is that both can coexist and both are useful and both have their places. But it's clear that some of those digital techniques have not, that were perhaps developed from MIR, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about later, the sort of technologies that go into things like Shazam hadn't made themselves into what might be thought of as the standard toolbox of the academic musicologist yet. Making those available such that an academic can use them is one of the parts of the project. There's also, I guess, the wider question of musicology in a modern environment that is inherently digital, but that's probably a good moment to pass over to Ben.
Yeah, I mean, so I think because there's sort of at some level two different sales pitches going on with the grant, and one of them is how can we take this big stack of tools that principally are developed by engineers and computer scientists and make them make sense for a practicing humanities researcher and research field. But the other side of it too is how we can take what goes on in modern society with sort of digital first and digital last music. So like music that's produced digitally and consumed digitally, and think about what musicology means given that context. And so like my side of the grant is really more that second piece, although my background is in MIR, so my PhD was developing automatic music information methods and things. But like this particular aspect, it's looking at how sort of amateur and like armchair musicology efforts can be spooled and understood in a way that might make sense towards expert audiences as well as the general public. Yeah, and so I think the grant's trying to do both sides because it's just broadly trying to make sense of the sort of digital reality that we all live in now. So.
Yeah.
And what that means inevitably is, of course, that our coverage is around a relatively small number of exemplars where we're trying to prove that this technology is applicable and it can come to musicological findings using those tools. But clearly, we're not trying to say that this is solved for the entirety of musicology. It's more to sort of give some exemplars to make people hopefully go, yes, I can see why that's useful and why that's applicable. I can see these results. Maybe I can then incorporate that into my own work. So there are various different pieces of outreach that we're doing that, including a summer school actually we ran here in Oxford last July, and which we'll run again next year, which is at the Digital Humanities Summer School around digital musicology, where we're very much trying to bring in musicologists, be those studying for their PhDs or those who have more experience in, and try and expose them to these tools so that they become more part of normal use, more sort of normalized and more accessible.
All right, and you have a workshop associated. It was the first annual workshop this year, or was it last year?
Last year was the first year, so this was the second year. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about the workshop. Who comes to that, and what do you talk about when you go there?
So it's attached to a larger conference that's been going on for about 15 years. Kevin, is that right? JCDL, yeah. So that's called the Joint Conference on Digital Libraries. So it's a pretty well established library science conference, academic library science conference, and the workshop is sort of picking up. So this wasn't the first time there's been a music related workshop attached to the conference, but it had been, I think, 10 or 11 years since they had done anything. So I think 2002 there was a music workshop attached to the Digital Libraries Conference. And so really what we're trying to do, I think, is gather together, because as Kevin said, what we're doing in particular is a lot of exemplars that sort of prove the point. It means that I think for our for what we're trying to do, it makes a lot of sense for us to gather other people that are really working in the same space, so that we can sort of broaden the list of examples and sort of proofs and sort of feel out the space in a lot of different ways. And I think that's really the point of the workshop, is to get people from various institutions and various angles together in the same room talking about these kinds of ideas. And so um, they've both been quite successful, and especially so the first year was a slightly larger output, and and actually it's turned into, we have a special issue of a digital libraries journal that's going to be covering the same kind of topic matter. That's going to be, is that out in a year and a half? I think the special issue is released. I can't remember the schedule, but in a while. It's an academic journal, so the schedule's long. But yeah, so I think that's kind of the scope of things, is just thinking about how we can broaden the participation of these kinds of communities. And I mean, I say broaden participation, I mean among academics, I should say, right? So this is very much like an academic workshop, but uh, it's still a matter of thinking about getting different sorts of people who probably wouldn't have come to a technical conference, because it's quite a technical conference, in the same room with technologists. So like our workshop, I think, has been pretty good at getting some practicing musicologists and other humanities practitioners in the sort of same space as people who are approaching similar problems, but from a sort of technological standpoint, either engineering or computer science.
So when we were setting up the reviews and so forth, we were very deliberately trying to assign reviewers from both a technological side and a musicology side, so that there'd be at least one reviewer of both, no matter which direction the paper had come from. Because within disciplines, within academia, you tend to have obviously specialism, and they're often around faculties or departments that, in this case, would be around either music or computer science or signal processing in electronic engineering. And one of the really interesting things about working in this field, I think one of the best bits about it, is actually that you are crossing those boundaries. You are working with people that come from those different backgrounds, and actually to get anywhere, you have to have some knowledge across those disciplinary boundaries, because you're applying approaches from each. And that's interesting in terms of the music information retrieval community, the MR community, which might be worth coming back to and talking around a little, because when that really sort of coalesced around, communities emerge in academia, when that started to exist and be something that everyone in that group recognized as a thing that they called music information retrieval, it was actually quite a mix. It was a mix of people from a libraries background, a digital library background, because obviously there's the source material that's been organized. It was musicologists, because they were studying music, people who were actually into music synthesis, so creating digital music, and then the technologists who are interested in creating the algorithms to investigate that information digitally. And one of the things I think the workshop did was almost return to that starting point, because there had perhaps been a tendency in the wider community as a whole to focus more on the technological development and improvement of algorithms. I think the workshop's been quite useful in bringing back in, for instance, that curatorial aspect that comes from the digital libraries community, which increasingly, with sort of linked data and semantic web tooling, is an important thing, because that's all about bringing together the different resources and how to access them.
Do you think that, well, the first question I wanted to ask is, did you notice, or have you looked back over the history of both of these disciplines interacting, and did it kind of take a huge increase during a certain time period, obviously after the internet maybe, but I mean with Moog and like that sort of thing, I imagine that might have been the very, very beginnings of like electronic music and algorithms and things like that.
I mean, so I think there's two different aspects of it, right? So like music production has always had a sort of necessary relationship with technology, right? Mm-hmm. But I think sort of so at least this project is very much concerned with the sort of other side of things, right? With the sort of analysis and critique end of things, and I think that that I think to some extent has been a bit slower to take advantage of what various technological innovations can offer. Uh, and I mean, it sort of has and it hasn't. So I think that there are some aspects. So like if you look at issues around curation, for instance, where the way that like large collections of music are handled has actually taken advantage of a lot of different technological innovations over decades, really, and like has come to digital forms pretty early. But things like close reading still exist in much the same format and practice as they did 50, 100 years ago, right?
Wow.
I mean, there is still some truth to the idea of musicology occurring with one person examining a piece of sheet music, right? And so um, how much digital tools are going to change that is certainly open for debate. So I think it's a matter of what else is going on as opposed to like changing that like kind of mode of practice. And yeah, so there's it's mixed, I think.
Okay.
So I think you can see the adoption and the changes in people by sort of considering those different aspects. So there are one of the really interesting things about music is the different forms it comes in. So if you think about the fact that there is a symbolic representation, there is a score, but there's also a recording, and that recording might be of a slightly different version because they may have been played from the same sheet music, but that doesn't mean they'll sound the same. And therefore, the techniques you can use for those different forms are also different. So a lot of the audio analysis comes from actually taking an audio file, taking a recording. But how do you link that back to something like a score? So those become quite sophisticated uses of technology. But even at the, I guess, digitization aspects, there are reasonably large collections of very early manuscripts, for instance, in places like the British Library or here at Oxford. And there, even a digitization process would allow access to scholars around the world who wouldn't have had access to that material before. So although that still fits perhaps the scholarship model that might have existed before, it means that the access is greater. So the model has changed, but the number of people who have access to that information is far, far greater by there being high quality digital scans. But even in the case of scanning ancient manuscripts, that's not a trivial task. There's quite a lot of skill in both the scanning technology and of the person undertaking the task, and indeed the way you put that up on a website, because lots of those images are quite detailed. So there are sort of different layers, I think, at which people interact with it and at which the different technologies are applicable. And that's probably the sort of waves you see in terms of how people are adopting the technologies in academia, just as you see in the real world. Because again, one of the really interesting things about music is that it is, I guess, an industry in a sense now that is digital end to end. So recordings will be made digitally and they'll be published digitally. And when you think about it, there aren't actually that many forms of which that is true. And certainly music got there very early, I would say, compared to others.
Yes. I used to work at Sony in publishing and vinyl record management as well. And so, yeah, it's part of why I love talking to people about it. It really connects the entire world to me. But let me ask you what you guys are working on right now, some of your research and your other projects. Ben?
So the big sort of project that I've been working on is doing a sort of large scale analysis of the way people do social markup of lyrics. So and that's principally been from data drawn from a website called Genius.com, which allows people to basically explain what the meaning is behind like segments of lyric in a piece of music. And because whenever you do that, you create sort of a little wiki page around just that one little subset. So there's a lot of social fabric that sits in that process because it's inherently collaborative at a bunch of different levels. And so given that data, I've been doing a bunch of analysis around trying to better understand like how communities form, how those communities relate to the musical styles that are being discussed, if they relate to the musical styles being discussed, or if there are other sort of patterns of community organization going on there. If any of that is actually like a proxy for how similar pieces of music are, for various understandings of what that can mean. And some other sort of things around that. But so that's where the like principal piece of research that I've been personally doing is, and so that's been wrapping up. And then there's also the you pulled a quote from our the blog from the project grant from the PhD student at Goldsmiths,
Yeah.
Justin Gagan, who is also doing some network analysis work. Although his work is focused a little bit differently than mine, although they are sort of two pieces of a similar idea, where he's been looking at the sort of artifacts and biases that happen from large scale analysis of music. So he's been doing a investigation of the way genres occur and are organized in automatic classifiers that are used commercially. So there's a company called the Econest that was recently purchased by Spotify, and they have a like large apparatus for automatically sorting music into various genres. And a lot of what he's been working on is about how you can understand the sort of biases and organizations of those kinds of systems, because obviously that has an effect on how people are going to digest and understand music in ways that are potentially subtle and invisible to consumption and stuff like this. So I think that's kind of what's been going on, at least in my desk and the desk next to it. So
With your consumption project, I guess the first part of what you were saying,
yeah,
I had an idea, and I have no idea how to carry it out. But I study the history, or did study when I was in school, the history of concert posters.
yeah,
And one of the things that I really, really would love to see, maybe someday, is to have a way where we could post them geographically, and then have people also comment and say, I was at that concert, I loved it. Just kind of piece together this online digital history of concerts.
yeah.
And so just, I studied a lot about the artifacts, the physical part, why
Yeah.
people love vinyl and all those things.
Sure.
So, and then also how genres form over time.
Right.
But yeah, geographically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous number of aspects that you can sort of use to get at these kinds of questions. So it's the concert posters is it's kind of funny. There's someone in the music department that we're working with a bit on the grant so he's in the music department at Goldsmiths, but he's been working on an effort to digitize concert programs from about 1700 onward in various
Wow.
parts of Europe. So
Yeah.
so they go through like it's principally stuff that's published in like ads in newspapers and things. And they've got nearly 100% of it between 1700 and 1800 because the volume of concerts is not so high then. But so they have these very large digital databases of basically all the information that's encoded in the advertisements for these concerts, and then they also have a large collection of digitized programs that were at the concerts. And so a lot of it is it's a mix of sort of art music and pop music. What the coverage is, but it's quite interesting. And the other thing that reminds me of is, which is sort of on the flip side entirely, is there's a couple of commercial companies that have been making an effort on the web to do sort of better concert recommendations and stuff. And as a side effect of some of that, they've got pretty good coverage of modern concerts from popular artists. So there's a company that's based in London called Songkick that has very good, they call them gigographies for sort of, I don't know, like top maybe 5 or 10,000 most popular artists going back 15, 20 years. And they get a lot of it from effectively manually ingesting any kind of concert program or poster or whatever that they can work out. And so you can find, I don't know, someone like Beyonce or Jay-Z or some like that level of pop artist. They'll have like their entire performing history that you can just sort of go and grab. And I mean, they're a commercially funded startup that's trying to work out how to make money on the back of all of that. But like that data does exist and is available to play with for research and things too. So
It's cool. I'm very excited by. I mean, my nickname is Analog because I'm so low tech, but I'm excited by that, especially with the older programs you're talking about.
yeah,
To cross reference those maybe with art shows or
That's
ballet or
yeah.
other art forms is really amazing to figure out what was happening and how either similar or different we are. Um, so
So one of the things actually that came out of that work that's really interesting, sort of, is one of these serendipitous aspects of when there's research going this on. That of course, amongst those programs, there are also adverts. There are other pieces of historical artifacts that are included with those posters and with those programs that come out the digitization process. So there's lots of really interesting possibilities about linking them in and finding the pathways through the information that's coded within them. Sometimes that you're not expecting are there until you look at them. That project actually, if it's something that people want to look up, it's called In Concert. And I mean, In Concert Towards a Collaborative Digital Archive of Musical Ephemera is the full title that'll probably allow your favorite search engine to find it.
awesome. I'll put it in the notes. And what are you working on, Kevin?
Well, following on from that, actually, there's one piece of work we're doing in a different project with colleagues at Manchester and Queen Mary, but which is related to performance. So there's a huge archive of live music recordings from the Internet Archive, who run the Wayback Machine and basically collect huge amounts of data where they have a lot of freely available audio. And one of the things we were trying to do with that was piece together information about the performances. So when people upload to the Internet Archive, it's pretty freeform in the information they put in. But in theory, it has like the artist and the set listing and the venue in which case that performance took place. So one of our ideas was, okay, first of all, can we tidy up that data? Can we look for words that are similar? Can we do some sort of text-based analysis to just get the metadata right so you can find them out? But then once you have that, can you then use some of the computational analysis to say, is this really the same song? Because sometimes there will be errors in the metadata. So kind of for one to feed the other and vice versa. So, you know, take all the songs that are meant to be the same according to the metadata. Does an audio analysis support that? And vice versa. If the audio analysis says these seem to be the same song, then what does the metadata say? Can we correct that? We're working on that aspect of it at the moment. But the more interesting question then is, if we can get that part sorted, are there patterns you can spot in, say, tempo? We can easily bring up from that collection, given the metadata we have, a performance of the same song by the same artist at least 100 times over time, because they're all in that archive. Are there any changes in performance tempo? There's even sort of the golden questions like, at a hometown gig, does anything different happen? You know, are there more choruses? You know, do people repeat things, have an outro that lasts 10 minutes? And that's one of the things we're sort of looking to do around performance data. We also just finished off a piece of work. The team here have been working on a piece around, there was a performance of Wagner's Ring Cycle, just to go to the other end of the spectrum, in Birmingham last year. And we've just finished up a piece of work with our musicology colleagues here, where the musicologist was in the theatre annotating on a tablet digitally the things that were going on stage for later re-investigation of, again, the performance ephemera of that. So the things that are unique to the staging of it. And we've just finished up a piece of work publishing that as this linked data thing, so analysing the markup of the metadata and putting it up on the web.
Awesome. I did read what you sent me about that project, and I'm very interested. But I think we'll just continue on, and I may come back to it. So I have to ask, of course, everybody that interview, what is on your playlist right now? What are you listening to?
What am I listening to right now? Hold on, I'll look. I'll rather than make things up, here's the Spotify.
Yeah.
I've been listening to a lot of this South African guy called William Onyanpour, who I just recently discovered.
Cool.
It's like some 70s funk that I like tripped over recently. I don't know, I'm going through a thing with it. And then I just listen to a lot of instrumental hip hop, especially, so I've been traveling a lot, and my musical taste tends to be of a certain form when I'm on planes that's different maybe than like if I'm not. So yeah, like that's like people like DJ Shadow, sort of early work of his. What else is on here that's worth mentioning? There's an artist from South London, FKA Twigs, that I've been listening to a bit of lately. Um, yeah, things like that.
It's
Yeah.
cool. Kevin?
I can tell you what I listened to this morning here in the office, which is probably completely atypical, but links in nicely to the interview. So another thing that's going on with transform musicology is there's a study of a thing called conductus, which is Latin that goes through medieval music and was repeated. And one of the mini projects within the grant was to essentially do a search to see where these words had occurred in modern existence, which is really neat and really interesting in itself. But when we went to visit them, they gave us a CD. They actually went away and recorded these chants with some professional singers, and they gave us a CD. And actually, this morning was the first time when I found the moment to play that CD and listen to it. It's wonderful.
It is? Okay. I was going to say, oh, what was the verdict? So when they went to record all that, they were using, was it just a cappella or like actual instruments from the time period?
Just some.
Okay. Cool, though. This is also another reason I love interviewing people. Just figure out what you're listening to and the discovery and the connections. As you know, my website that's what it means. I'm fascinated by how it connects all these different areas and people. So I am going to, I guess, sign off. Thank you so much. I hope to interview you both again, maybe separately about your projects, and to keep in touch.
Sure.
So
Great.
thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
a lot.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.